Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Team Anywhere. And I'm Ginny Bianco Mathis on the East Coast, and I am here with my partner, Mitch Simon, on the West Coast. And today we are thrilled to have. Yes, I see her. She's all excited.
She's jumping up and down.
I think so. To have Denise with us today, who is going to be talking about creativity, and we'll be talking about her books and different ways to get in touch with her. And welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Welcome, Denise.
Yay.
And Denise, I because I just feel so familiar with you, I left off your last name, but everyone else out there doesn't know you. Denise Jacobs. Denise Jacobs.
Denise has a last name. That's great.
Terrific. Well, Denise, something we all can agree on is that 2020 is gone, and we're looking to 2021 with a lot of different feelings. Share with us what your journey was like and what you learned.
Oh, wow. So I'm actually laughing because the first month of January didn't actually feel different from 2020. So when you're like, it's officially gone, I was like, ha, that's really funny because it really didn't feel like it. Things seem to feel more settled now, but maybe that's just an illusion. We'll see. What was my journey and what have I learned? 2020 was a really hard year for me personally because I had like a very emotional an emotional time, and the end of an really important relationship to me ended, and I spent a lot of the year grieving that. And then that on top with all the other things just made it a real challenge of a year. But I think one of the things that I've learned that certainly is starting to feel poignant right now is that time does heal things. Time does heal wounds, and
Yes.
and that we need to be kind of available to and open to and paying attention to the opportunities that are in front of us. So
Mm-hmm.
one of the things, as a person who's a professional speaker and trainer and consultant, is that I spent a lot of time traveling for work, and I literally haven't been in an airport or on an airplane since April.
Feels weird, doesn't
And
it?
it feels absolutely bizarre, but it also feels kind of really right in a lot of ways, and had made me I was actually just thinking about this last night, where I was thinking, I traveled so much that I know it sounds weird and it probably is going to sound sacrilegious to a lot of my colleagues, but I don't really actually want to go anywhere for a while. And I have the prospect of potentially speaking at a conference in Norway in September. They're, kind of going ahead with planning it and everything. And I think this is one of the first times that I feel somewhat ambivalent about the prospect of going to Oslo, which Oslo is one of my favorite places to travel to. And I love speaking at the conference, and I love it's like a family reunion, going and seeing all the folks. And I'm like, so I feel like that's the other thing is, and I'm sure a lot of people have experienced this too, is opening up to another part of myself that I haven't really been able to pay attention to or cultivate or develop. I've been nesting very hard and fixing up my yard and fixing up my house. And that's also another thing where it's like, I never had the opportunity for that. If you're home for 2 or 3 days or 2 or 3 weeks, it's kind of hard to think about a home improvement project. You're like, I'm going to hire somebody or whatever. I'm going to start it, and then I have to leave again. I still have work to do. Well, all this time.
Sorry for interrupting. I loved the term you used. You've been nesting. I think a lot of us can say that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the nesting then has caused us reflection.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're peeking over the nest and seeing, now, what's up.
What's next? Yeah.
Well, you did a what next? You have your new book, Banish Your Inner Critic.
Mm-hmm.
Silence the voice of self-doubt to unleash creativity and do your best work.
That's it.
So, talk to us about that. What are the key takeaways? Why did you want to write it, and what do you want people to take away from that book?
Well, I wrote the book because I had struggled so much with seeing myself as a creative person, and really that voice of self-doubt that pops up whenever you're trying to do your best work, whenever you're trying to show up powerfully and make a contribution to the world, right? And I feel like this is true if you're a creative. I mean, the book is kind of, geared in some way towards creatives, but it's really, I actually really feel like it is kind of a quintessential professional development book just in general, because every single person that I've talked to can relate, like whether they consider themselves creative or not. And I would also argue that everybody is creative in a certain way, whether you're a leader or whether you're a designer or whether you're a developer or an accountant or whatever. Everybody exercises creativity in the form of creative problem solving. And so, it's just a matter of kind of how you're creative, not if you're creative.
Yes.
But I personally struggled with the correct question of, am I creative, right? For a really long time. And it wasted a lot of time and energy that I could have spent doing, actually just doing the work. And that was one of the reasons why I wrote this book, is to help people kind of remove those mental blocks so that they could get to doing the really good work that they're capable of.
Oh, fantastic. And I know you have done some speaking, which I found fascinating because I didn't know about it, around the research part.
Mm-hmm.
The jazz singers and the hip hop art. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So one of the things that's very cool about writing a book is, you have a premise, or you have something that, for me, the things that I spoke about and do keynotes on and run workshops on and everything. It's great to, I am a person where I don't like just telling people what to do or giving people suggestions. I like to give them the reasons why the suggestions are effective, because it's a very real thing for women to be questioned about their authority. And it is a very real thing for women of color and Black women to be especially questioned about their authority. And so I literally didn't want anybody coming at me talking about, well, you're just saying that. I'm like, no, actually, this is very heavily researched. Thank you very much for asking. Let's move on to the next thing. And I also personally, just from my own personal standpoint, I like knowing why things work. Right? Like, I like knowing the mechanisms of why something is effective. It's one thing for somebody to say, take this medicine. And it's another thing to say, take this medicine because it does blah, 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 blah.
Right.
Right. So one of the pieces of research and one of the findings that I found was a TED Talk by Charles Lim. And he is a neuroscience researcher. And he did an experiment where he took jazz improvisational musicians. He also took hip hop artists, but people who did like improvisational music, improvisational jazz and hip hop.
Mm-hmm.
He hooked them up and put them into an MRI machine, and he actually scanned their brains while they were doing their improvisational music. And one of the things that he found was there is a part of the brain, part of the prefrontal cortex in the brain. And this is the part of the brain that's in charge of behavior modification, self-judgment, basically kind of the, quote, higher, and I won't say quote, but the kind of higher capacities that allow people to function in societies, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's all about making a judgment call on whether something's wrong or right, and then changing your behavior because of it. Well, it turns out that when people do improvisational jazz, art, everything, people are in the zone, that part of the brain is quiet. That part of the brain isn't functioning as much, and it is it's very low level. And other parts of the brain, the quote creative parts of the brain, are the ones that are really active and firing.
Ooh.
And I realized, during these experiments, I was like, this is the inner critic. I mean, self modification and judgment, yeah, all over the place, right?
Right.
And so I got really excited by this because I was like, look, you can actually pinpoint the inner critic in a part of your brain. And there's scientific research that shows that when that part of your brain isn't active, that's when your ideas come out. That's when you can riff. That's when you can take something that somebody else has got, and that, when you're not afraid of what people think, if you're not afraid of making a mistake, when you're not thinking that you don't know what you're talking about, and like, what are people going to, so I personally, I find all of that fascinating, but I find it also really powerful, because that means that we can use that knowledge, and we can leverage that mechanism for our own uses.
That's great. I got a question. I love this, and I'm definitely going to check out that TED Talk.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out, Denise, how you play a saxophone in an MRI machine. But I guess I'll get that to the TED Talk, right?
He actually had them work with keyboards. And
okay.
So he actually literally had like a keyboard that he had wired up so that they could play it while they were laying down.
The MRI machine.
Oh.
Yeah. Cool.
And yeah.
I'm interested. So I do improv, not music, with my voice, because my musical talents are not that great. A lot of us now are at home, working from home. We will be working from home for a very long time, if not forever. How would I, working from home where, gosh, I'm alone, or gosh, my kids are yelling in my ear, or gosh, just, like if I'm working with you, Denise, and I think you're on the East Coast, I'm on the West Coast, and I don't know what you're thinking, and I'm not sure if I say something's gonna be okay. How do I overcome that thinking to actually put myself forward? Because it's, maybe I know you, we've been friends, but now you're so far away, and I've kind of lost touch, and it just feels very scary for me to put myself out there, not knowing what's going to happen, especially online.
Right. But so one of the things, I mean, especially because you're an improv person, I mean, you never know what's going to happen. That's kind of the beauty of improv and doing improv training, is that you realize everything is improv. Every life is improv, right? Like, I don't know what you guys are going to say next. I have an idea, but I literally don't know what the next thing is going to come out of your mouth. And so in the same kind of vein, to just look at everything. And I think too, that's one of the attitudes that we've had to adopt and adapt to during this period of time, is this attitude of practice, and this attitude of we'll see, and this attitude of I don't know all the answers, and this attitude of I don't know what's coming, right?
Yes.
We've really had to embrace living with uncertainty and becoming more comfortable with uncertainty. Also, I would like to point out that we have always had to live with uncertainty, and the fact that we thought that things were certain is, and always has been, and always will be, an illusion. Let's be clear. But I think people are, more in touch with how uncertain things can be, and how we need to, basically build up our muscles to deal with uncertainty, to have more adaptability, and to have more flexibility. And also to have less self-judgment and less self-criticism, right? Because that's one of the things you were saying, Mitch, is how do I know, what if I say something wrong? What if you do say something wrong? The same way that you would any other time, work with it. And then you can always ask questions, and that you can always yes and, right? That's the beauty of improv.
Yes. And I'd also like to ask you, how does a leader or a company influence their teams to be able to have that attitude of well, I don't know, we'll see, anything could change?
So it's really cool, because I just finished writing and filming my latest course for LinkedIn Learning, which is developing your creativity as a leader. And that will be coming out in a couple of months, I think, probably late in April. maybe.
That's great.
It's exciting. I'm really happy with the course. And one of the things that I talk about a lot in this course is, first, as a leader, modeling behavior to basically give the permission to the rest of your team and the folks underneath you to engage in that behavior as well. And so essentially beginning to, laying the foundations for creating the culture of something. As a leader, I think it is that giving yourself permission and knowing that there's power and strength in saying, we don't actually have all the answers. We don't really know. We're figuring this out as we go along. Very open to input or in ideas, because this is something that we're all working for and working to together.
Mm-hmm. And so then we open up. You role model it,
right?
So what are some of the actual techniques? Do you actually put it on the table? Listen, let's all create a space for creativity.
Yeah, actually, there's that. There's, basically like really being aware. So one thing is being aware of your mindset and, seeing if you have a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset, and then working to start developing a growth mindset. Another one is, and this is one of the things, like there's actually some really kind of cool and fun ways, I think, to start to first develop your own creativity and then to, model that and then create the structure for this for other people in the organization. One of them, in addition to the mindset, but another one is to start developing your curiosity. So to kind of start sparking curiosity and to really look at things. I call it releasing the tyranny of the expert. A lot of times when you feel like you're supposed to be an expert, then you don't allow, first of all, you're faking it. You're feigning being an expert. You're doing what you think an expert should do rather than actually being the expert. And then two, a lot of times you block yourself from input that can be very valuable input. Right. And so when you get to a place where you start being like, let me look at this and see what it is that I know I studied this, or I know I've seen this, I feel like I've seen this 100 times before, but what is it in here that I haven't seen before? Right. And then also, again, to encourage the folks in your teams to do that. Like, hey, let's try to find what we don't know or we don't see. One of the examples that I like to give for that is to actually have people, the phrase, I know it like the backside of my hand.
Yes.
When's the last time you actually looked at the backside of your hand?
I don't need to. I know it like the backside of my hand.
Hey. So I'm actually will tell people, look at the backside of your hand, and most likely it's been a while and there's all kinds of things where you're like, oh yeah, I have this black spot on the back of my hand, I think because a pencil got poked into my hand when I was a kid and the graphite's still embedded into the skin. I have another one actually like that on another part of my finger. And it's like every time I look at my hand, I'm like, oh yeah, that's there. Oh, look at this. Oh, look at that scar. I totally forgot about that. Oh. And so it's like rediscovering the familiar.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. Another thing too from that is that, and you hear people talk about failure, failing forward, failing fast and often, blah, 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 blah. But one of the things that I feel like you don't hear very often when people talk about failure is the fact that failure is how we learn. That failure, it's only through failure. I mean, you can learn things by doing stuff well, but it doesn't register the same way as failure does. And failure forces you to be creative. Failure forces creative problem solving. When you're like, why didn't this work? And then you have to go and you have to look at all the things, and then you start to explore other options that you wouldn't explore if you hadn't failed. So I also encourage people to reframe failure, not because of all this trendy, buzzword kind of laden approaches that deal with failure, but because failure helps you learn, because you learn from failure, and because when you fail, you end up being able to do something better later.
What are some practices that you would have? I know that in improv, one of our practices, which actually is really difficult, is to throw a beanbag to another person, and that person has to not catch it.
Mm.
It's the funniest because it's like, how could I not catch it? It takes a while actually to get the people around the table to actually not catch it and to make a mistake.
Mm.
What are some practices that you have that would encourage people to reframe failure, take on failure, and learn from it?
Actually, I think some of them is actually to fail on purpose, to
Mm,
actually deliberately try to do something wrong or poorly. I actually
right.
teach that as a creativity exercise I mean, if you were just talking about something like, kind of a creativity exercise, to actually like make something as bad as you possibly can make it.
That's
If
nice.
you're
I
like,
like
if
that.
you were like, I actually love doing this exercise in my workshops, and I'll say, I want you to write the worst poem that you can possibly write. I'm going to give you guys like 3 minutes.
Fantastic.
Write
Can
an
you imagine?
horrible poem.
I'm going to do this all wrong. I can't do it. I'm going to do it all wrong.
Right, right. I'm gonna write it horribly wrong.
I'm going to write horribly good.
Right. And the things that people have come up with, I'm like, that's a great poem. Like, I actually can't see any problems with this, right?
Right.
And so there's that aspect of it, but then it's kind of like, okay, but so then what is wrong about this? What is bad about this? Okay, then in order to move forward, don't do that. Right? like
Yeah.
like to kind of have it more top of mind to know what to avoid, or what it is that you're actually shooting for.
Great exercise.
Yeah.
In fact, do you have another one? Could you share some? But it doesn't have to be for
Well,
that. But
just one
for this
well.
whole well, this whole creativity, what do you encourage the leaders to be doing that they're not doing now?
Well, I mean, a lot of this is this, first of all, getting in touch with your own creativity. So this, instead of, so many people have this concept of, well, I'm not creative, I'm analytical. I'm not
Mm.
creative, I'm not creative, I'm a leader, I'm a CEO, or an executive. Like, I'm not a creative person. It's like, well, actually you are. So see how you are creative. And then, like I said, some of these kind of subtle and unusual ways to develop creativity. So the curiosity, the failure, the seeking out surprise. Actually, have people keep a surprise journal, and that kind of goes along with that curiosity. Like, what has surprised you today? What
Oh,
did
that's
you
good. That's
expect?
good.
And then what was a surprise? And then what not only surprised you about what kind of ended up happening today, what surprised you about yourself? Like, did you have a reaction or a response or anything that you were surprised about?
Mm-hmm.
So actually, to have people like seek surprise, to intend surprise and seek it out, instead of saying, I know, because that's it. Everybody gets into a rut, and they start to think, been there, done that, seen everything. You can't surprise me. And it's like, well, actually, if you're paying attention, you're looking for it, you will be surprised. So seek that out,
Totally.
because that sparks new ideas, right? Another one is to understand the mechanics of flow and what causes a flow state to happen, so that you can try to engineer it. Now, the one thing that I like to warn people is that you can't make flow happen, but
Mm-hmm.
you can lay the foundations and set the stage for flow. One of the things I think that is the most important is that if you look back to times where you've had a flow state and you've been in the zone, what was happening, which you didn't realize at the time because you didn't care, because you were in the flow, you're like, I'm not going to think about like why this is happening. I'm just in it. And it's exciting. But
Right.
but that there's this wonderful nexus point of skill and challenge. So it's that your skill level matches the level of the challenge. And when you are walking that fine line and kind of in doing that dance, what you do is you get into something called a flow channel. And the way you stay in the flow channel is to just make sure that these two things are in balance with each other. As soon as your skill level exceeds the level of the challenge, you will get out of flow. And as soon as your challenge exceeds your skill level, you will get out of flow. So I think that's also really cool. The other thing probably were there that you didn't realize is that you had goals. You had an objective that you were trying to reach, You were able to focus. So you had, concentrated time where you pretty much at least believed that you weren't going to get interrupted, or you engineered it so that you weren't getting interrupted. And then that you've got this feedback loop happening. And that's really cool too. Like that you got to make sure that you got the feedback, because back to the failure thing, when you have something that doesn't quite work out, you can adjust in real time, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you got that feedback, and then you have a sense of control, and then you've got the reward that comes from either actually creating the thing that you're creating, or getting to a point of completion, or just the process in itself is rewarding.
Almost getting, again, it's a practice thing of almost getting used to those surprises
Mm-hmm.
and feeling strong. Go ahead, throw more surprises at me.
Right.
I'm getting better and better at dealing with
And
them.
being delighted with them, right? Like in a lot of ways, when you make those, that's discovery, right? That's like a scientific discovery. You've got this thing happening, or whatever kind of discovery, and then you're like, oh my God, I had no idea.
Yeah.
Right? And then that actually feeds the process.
What would you recommend? What do you recommend in this new hybrid environment? So I'm a leader. I've got some people online, all over the world, whatever, and we're trying to get things done.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to spark creativity
Mm-hmm.
for the reasons that you just shared.
Right. Mm-hmm.
It gives you a space. There's no judgment, which is fabulous, because now you have people from all over, and you don't want judgment coming in. So, what advice do you give?
Well, so there's a couple of things. Some of the stuff that I recommend for people is, and especially in this kind of collective creativity place, is to, first of all, like to leverage the power of play. So many people take work so seriously, but they don't acknowledge that people actually do more and they do better when they have play elements. And that when like work becomes play, it becomes more fun than fun, right? Like work that is play is more fun than fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I love kind of the idea of working play, or working kind of fun things into, or enjoyable things, or things that kind of spark that into like your meetings, or into your sessions, or whatever. If you have like regular Zoom sessions, or maybe even people sometimes, I mean, I know I do this. I obviously I don't work in a team, but I have a friend who has a regular writing Zoom that happens every day at 9:00 in the morning. And whenever I am working on something, just to have somebody there where we come in, we check in. What are you working on? I'm working on this. What are you working on? I'm working on that. Okay, set the timer for 20 minutes. We do a sprint where they're kind of like almost like parallel play type of thing.
Yes.
And then we check in, we take a break, we check in, and then we do sprints again. You might end up setting up like a work sprint, like a regular work sprint for people, that they could just set up a Zoom, even if you're not interacting with people, that you just set this timer. But maybe before you start to do the work, like let's say it's a 2-hour sprint time, or it's an hour and a half sprint time, maybe for the first 10 minutes, you can have people actually do something with their hands, like Lego or coloring or something like that, that just is like, putting something together or taking something apart, that kind of puts your brain into a certain space, where then you are actually able to better problem solve, and focus and concentrate afterwards.
Or just put on some hip hop music and go at it.
Potentially, but some people, like I personally, I don't like to work with music on. I find it too distracting, especially unless it's music with, so for me, unless it's music with no lyrics, and it needs to be fairly unfamiliar. So,
Ah,
like I can work to jazz. I can work to classical music. I can work to like it's called something called lo-fi hip hop, which is like just kind of like nice, bass lines and like beats,
yes.
but usually no lyrics or words. And it's just kind of like a groove on in the background. I can do that. But if I need to read or focus or concentrate, I can't have anything on at all. Yeah.
And that's what folks need to find out about
Right.
themselves as they play with their own creativity.
Right. Some people work really well with coffee house sounds in the back and stuff like that. There's
Mhm.
actually something called, I think, caffeine. It used to be there. I'm not quite sure if it still exists.
Yeah, no, I've listened. I've listened sometimes to the Coffee House soundtrack over and over and over again. And it actually works. But
Yeah. I mean,
Interesting.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
like, it was actually like a website that you can go to. Oh, Coffivity.
Ah.
Coffivity,
Yeah.
yes, we'll put that
Coffivity.
in the notes. Coffivity,
Yeah.
yeah, yes.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's great.
what is because we're getting to the end of the podcast. I was just wondering, like three tips that you could really help out either leaders or members of a team on how to basically unleash your creativity, but really how do you appreciate that you actually are a creative person, and what would be the things to then start doing? So I'm going to listen to you,
Hmm.
and Denise says I'm creative. What's the first things I need to do to really not be so afraid of this incredible power that I have within me?
Well, so the first thing that I was saying, and I said it earlier, is to figure out where you're creative, right?
Hmm.
Because that's a lot of times people say they're not creative because they don't know where it is that they're creative. And one of the tips that I give people is to look at where they go into flow. So,
Okay.
what situations, what things, where is it that you hit a flow state? Is it when you're writing something, writing a report, because some people do? Is it when you're working with numbers? Is it when you're talking with people? Is it when you're strategizing? Is it when you're designing? Is it like, what is it? Because there's that place, even if you think, okay, I can't remember the last time I went to a flow state, then I'm like, okay, what are the tasks that you absolutely like to do? And what are the ones that you absolutely hate doing, right? That you're just like, how about if you take a stick and put me in the eye in it with it instead of me having to like work out this budget or whatever. So when you get to that place and you start to have that awareness of what it is that you enjoy and what it is that you don't enjoy, and then probably what you enjoy are also the places where you can hit a flow state, then you can say, this is where I'm creative. This is where I do my best creative problem solving, right?
That's great. Right.
And then you can take that and you can start to capitalize upon it, right? You can try to expand more of that time during your day, and you can try to contract more of the other ones. And I always say to people, when you start to discover that, then what you do is you write a to don't list. You write a list of things not to do. And that you on that list, it's something that you're either going to delete, delegate, or alter. So it could be something where you're like, I actually don't need to do this, and this is ridiculous. I don't even know why I'm doing it. I'm just not going to do it. Or you delegate it, and you can find somebody else who can do it. Either outsource it, or maybe if you're working on a team, you can talk to them and you could be like, hey, Cecilia, I know you're really good at this, and I'm not good at it. Like, is there? I mean, what do you don't like to do? And maybe you can find something where you can swap out. And she'd be like, girl, if I have to do another, like if I have to design another or come up with another, like, outline for this, like outlines are my jam. Okay, check it out. You take this, I'll take that, whatever, that you can do that. Or you can alter it. And maybe there's a way that you've been doing it that you can do it differently. Maybe there's an app that will help. Maybe there's a process that you can learn or something that'll change, that'll transform that so that it becomes easier for you.
Great,
I
thanks.
love how and I'm probably going to have to now read the book more closely. I love how you've taken this concept of create, sort of see in the air, right? And you say, no, sit down. Where's your flow? Well, what do you mean? Well, look at these things. Right? That is a fabulous path to take someone down, to pinpoint it and start being.
Yeah, I mean, I think creativity kind of gets a bad rep in the respect that people think it's this like ethereal, like bubbles, like chasing, bubbles being blown.
Good,
and it's
good.
Like,
yes.
and it's like,
yes.
no, it's like, it's actually, there's all this great science around it. There's all these great practices, and it's just about like raising your level of awareness, kind of like I was saying before.
Right. And if nothing else, that's what this past year has done.
Listen,
Because we've had to nest and reflect, this whole raising this level of awareness, which is necessary for these kinds of things to come through. And I love your piece on the research. I saw you talk about that, and that there's this actual space, and it will quiet down. You can silence all those shoulds and all those criticisms. Just fabulous.
Yeah.
Thank you. Mitch.
I think this is awesome. I'm really excited and encouraged, because I always want to bring my creativity to my work. And I love the idea that, a lot of us are just afraid to take risks. We're afraid to put it out there. Like I said in the questions, I'm challenged because I'm further away from the mothership. And that might encourage me to take fewer risks because I don't want to upset someone. In fact, the Wall Street Journal article today was about being funny at work. You can be funny, but you don't want to upset anybody. And so that's my, it's one of these things where I'm isolated. I don't want to upset anybody. Then how can I move towards being more creative? Because as you said, Denise, that's my jam, is to be much more creative. And that's in fact how I contribute to the team in greater ways. So that for me is really, from a Team Anywhere perspective, my greatest concern is how to make that happen, how to be in flow, and how team leaders can encourage that when we're in this new paradigm of everyone being dispersed and not having that personal interaction like we used to have.
One of the things that you said, I mean, that just as kind of a parting idea, is that when you contribute and you share your ideas, that means that people can benefit from it. If you hold on to your ideas and you're kind of miserly with them, or you're too afraid to share them, then this potentially extraordinarily beneficial idea isn't actually going out and proliferating throughout your network, throughout your group. And so then people lose out on it. So that's the other thing I would think is, do you want to risk withholding something that can be very valuable, right? It's almost like it's food, people need to eat, and you've got something that's like, tasty and nutritious, but you're afraid that, like somebody doesn't like beets. I don't like beets personally, but beets are good for you, and some people love them. So bring your beets, serve them along. For the people who like beets are going to be all over them, and for the people like me who are like hard pass, that's fine. But so bring your knowledge, bring your tasty and nutritious and delicious knowledge.
Great analogy.
Yeah,
I love that.
Yep. Well, thank you so much. This has been fascinating. Of course, now I'm going to be thinking about creativity all afternoon.
And beets.
And beets. That is correct.
And beets. Yeah, I'm okay with
it. Right. That's what we said.
Not a hater.
Yeah. And looking forward to getting this out to everybody so that, just as you said, they can take advantage of hearing this and putting it and incorporating it into their lives.
Wonderful.
Thanks again.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Denise. And thank you to all our listeners. If you've enjoyed this episode of Team Anywhere, please share this episode with Denise Jacobs to all of your friends and colleagues, and for even those people who don't like beets. But we'll see you next week, on another episode of Team Anywhere. Thank you so much.